Hey, this is Andy Schmuckler. Uh, I'm here to convey a better human story in general. The topic right now, something that's brought this to my attention, the problem we have with immigration. And by we, I'm going to say what I mostly mean is humankind. Um, Americans are one group that are having a problem with immigration, but you look around uh, all kinds of nations in Europe, and you see that immigration's been at the heart of a lot of difficulties. It was the one place in Germany where Angela Merkel fell afoul of her people, and um, it wasn't good for for German politics, and it hasn't been good for Swedish politics. The problems that have arisen in conjunction with immigration have had a lot to do with Sweden swinging from a social democratic society. It was very benign to a much angrier, far right, semi fascist regime. Anyway, I'm not going to go bother. You can see it's happened in a lot of places. I think the Orban's turning Hungarian democracy into a form of illiberal democracy, he calls it. I call it fascism. I think that was aided by the response of the people of his country to a major influx or threat of an influx. I think from the Syrian civil war was basically what propelled a whole lot of people who were refugees from horrific circumstances into Europe, where some countries welcoming than others. I think about this when I read an email I got from a guy who's a friend of mine. Well, that's putting it a little too strongly. We've had a friendly relationship for about 40 years where he sometimes brought me in as a speaker. I really respected the work that he was doing. He's a rabbi, um, very humane orientation, strong moral and spiritual and ethical core to everything he does. And I like interacting with him once in a while, and I hope he uh, still considers me collegial. But in any event, he never initiates contact with me, which is fine. Um, and once in a while, a couple times in the last few years, I've written to him in response to what I see from him because I'm on a mailing list of his. And he sent, gee, I wonder if I could find it quickly. Let's see, it's something from the Statue of Liberty. Uh, um, it, the Statue of Liberty has this poem at the bottom. Send me your hungry, you're tired, you're poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free. Other, um, I lit my lamp beside the golden door, a welcoming to people who are fleeing sometimes very horrific things. Emma Lazarus was Jewish. She was writing, I believe, at the what wasn't it when the Statue of Liberty first opened? Anyway, it was well before major Jewish immigration. But my rabbi friend told some history about how before World War II started, infamously a ship with 600 emigrants from fleeing Hitler's murderous sword hanging over their heads, were turned back and forced to go back to Germany, where I gather they most all died, were murdered. Uh, so he's bringing that up in the context of what we Americans are looking like we are doing or will do at the border, which is to be unwelcoming. Um, the, I'm imagining, though I didn't read it close enough to know how much he said this, that it's got to do with the border deal that might be getting worked out, but probably won't go anywhere because Trump wants to run against the failure to deal with the issue. So he's told the Republicans to make sure that no solutions get enacted. But it's not a welcoming solution. And I think that I'm suspecting that my rabbi friend is responding to this, in a sense, capitulation to the unwelcoming side of the American political sphere in relation to immigration. Because there really is a legitimate problem about the magnitude of the problem right now. I mean, it's one thing to deal with the trickle, it's another thing to deal with the flood. And my rabbi friend is really calling upon us to be welcoming and compassionate and to protect the people who are facing unspeakable dangers back in their home countries. You know, like in Mexico, where, say, the woman and her children, the man of that family was murdered by a cartel, and they're in danger of suffering the same. You know, legitimate fears for their safety. I mean, I don't know what proportion of the people coming to our borders have a legitimate fear for their safety in that sense. I kind of wonder. I mean, it's one thing to be subject to a genocide. It's another thing to be an oppressed people who live in circumstances where there is violence and the rule of law is not reliable. But that's the circumstance much of the time in many societies throughout history. So I don't know where exactly. I should know more, but I don't know how many of these people should be likened to the Jews on that ship that got turned back to Germany. But we have a problem, like New York City being inundated with so many immigrants that, well, lots and lots of problems. I can't remember the specifics, but you know, a real problem in that liberal bastion. There is another side to the issue, and one of the things that we need to think about. My rabbi friend is saying that we should have this attitude of compassion for our fellow people. But the reality is, it's not just Americans who can get upset. A large segment of people are likely to get upset when a lot of strangers that they feel are somewhat alien are suddenly part of their world. I think it's fairly clear that was a major part of what led the British to do that. Like Brexit, we're getting overrun by people who aren't us. We can say that that's not the way people should feel. And we should say that society should find ways of dealing with these people that aren't disruptive. And I don't know how easy or hard it would be. But a lot of countries have done what they could with this issue, and a lot of countries in which there is a large influx of immigration, the reaction has been to make the politics of that society more fascistic, whether it's Le Pen's group in France or the AFT in Germany or Orban's party in Hungary. Anyway, there's a long list of places you can point to, including the Brexit vote, where the reality is that societies have difficulty dealing with immigration. And you could talk about how much in terms of quality of, what kind of immigration and in what magnitude. I don't know exactly how that all figures. The Arabs around that are in these places where riots break out, sometimes not, in the environs of Paris every 5 years or whatever, and the draconian things that governments like Gray Abbott's in Texas do with razor wire and defying the Supreme Court. And anyway, this is it elicits some things that are really not good to have elicited in your politics. And you can say, well, it shouldn't be, but you got to deal. You got to go to battle with the realities of the society you're in. And the reality is that a lot of people in America, particularly in conservative America, which has more of a proclivity toward bigotry, but this is what happens, and there are costs. If we were to act like everybody is this rabbi wants them to be, when the reality is that a lot of people aren't, we might do more harm than good. The harm done to the overall power structure when you've got people making decisions based on how they're responding unhappily to the immigration. How do you weigh that against the people you might turn back at the border that my rabbi friend would be saying? My rabbi friend would be saying, this is what we should do. Now, every other time I've written to my rabbi friend, it's been to reinforce what he said, because he puts out actually rather beautiful messages, and I think spiritually he's the real deal. But as a guy who I have sort of one foot into that kind of moral, spiritual realm of the ideal that he's got, but I also, have been mentally and to some extent professionally involved in the game of making decisions based on the consequences. I fundamentally am in accord with what is called a consequentialist morality, which is to say, at every turn, I think that the question we should ask is, of the various courses of action open to us, which one is most likely to best move the world from where it is now to what it ideally would be? I have the ideal in mind, but the question of consequences means that sometimes you got to deal with realities that you ideally wouldn't be there, but they are. Like if we actually did what I think my rabbi friend would legislate, if it was up to him to write our immigration policy, if we actually did that, I'm rather afraid that it would just compound the problems that we now face where democracy in America, and I don't mean Tocqueville's book, I mean the actual, in many ways, magnificent thing that our founders gave us, is being threatened from a fascist force. This may not be a time where we can, I mean, when you've got a Republican Party who's willing to kill a policy, a deal about immigration, because the leader who calls all the shots would rather not solve the problem if it can help him get the presidency back by exploiting the problem. You've got a problem there with the realm of consequences. You don't want to play into his hand, for example, where I think that the consequentialist recommendation in this situation, given what we see happening in the world when huge populations are challenged by rather large influxes of immigrants, I think that at this moment in our history, we have to be we have to tamp down the spirit of generosity that Emma Lazarus expressed so beautifully at the base of the Statue of Liberty. I mean, I love that America did light its lamp by the Golden Door. I know there's more to it than that. There's cheap labor and all that kind of stuff. But there is something that you can find in the history of immigration in America that's kind of beautiful and noble, and that represents what my rabbi friend. I mean, he talked about how his father was raised in Berlin and got over here just before the door closed to that other ship bringing Jewish refugees from Hitler's killing machines. So my guess is that we can work to find ways of giving adequate weight to the legitimate aspirations and desperations of all these people, but to balance it with some consequentialist assessment of what will happen in the American power system if we go this way or that way. And with fascists already threatening, with what we know happens with immigration, this may not be a good time for my rabbi friend's advice to prevail. I feel fine about putting out the values and the vision to make sure that we give adequate weight and do everything that we can that makes sense in view of what might be the cost of doing too much. So those are some of my thoughts, and maybe I'll send this video to my rabbi friend and invite him to respond or not as he sees fit. The spiritual leaders who focus on not the realpolitik, but the highest values, the ideals, don't get to make the decisions usually, and it's probably often a good thing. I mean, I think that my rabbi friend's voice should be louder in America, because he calls people to their better selves, and we need all of that we can get. But it's a different role to be using that voice to appeal to people to be something better. Remember what Emma Lazarus said. Remember what we so regrettably did when we turned back that ship. Good messages to hear. But the people who have to make the decision need to be consequentialists and not deal in absolutes. Weigh this good against that good. And figure out as best we can, acting in a world where we're beset by so much uncertainty, as best we can to give adequate weight to the legitimate aspirations of all these people, while also protecting democracy from the growing power of fascism. One of the things I think that we can use this immigration issue for, besides tamping down how much we provoke the brokenness or whatever you want to call it in people that actually, it isn't just brokenness. I mean, I think it's perfectly legitimate that a lot of the people who have been unhappy with immigration, that their world isn't necessarily as congenial to be in for a variety of reasons, not only bigotry. It's a problem. What do you do with homelessness? How do you employ people? Do you make camps? It's not just a brokenness that leads that to happen. But I think that the attention to this issue can be useful also in dealing with some of the other issues. The reason Europe got, what's the word for flooded? Inundated with immigrants about 2011 or so was the Syrian Civil War. The Syrian Civil War took place in a lot of contexts, but some people will say that climate change was really the driving force that led to the Civil War, through the demonstrations and then the crackdown and then the fracturing of the country into civil war. And the demonstrations had to do with people who are suffering from climate change-induced drought, if I recall. Well, if we look to the future of the unfolding crisis of climate change, one of the major things that looks important to call people's attention to, in addition to crop failures and rising sea levels and whatever else, is that there's going to be a lot of migration. I mean, some areas are going to become less habitable. There's going to be droughts. There's going to be famines. I mean, we've already got that problem. I mean, we already have all these people trying to cross from Libya to Italy in boats that often capsize with dozens and dozens of people drowning all at once. And the Italians often, keeping them from landing. It is a problem we already have, that the climate is going to lead to more and more immigration. And the picture is ugly of people either being turned away or societies being inundated with immigrants, and that having a destructive effect on the social and political realities of the recipient countries. So I think that, I don't know how you get people to be ready to do what a rational and moral society would be doing about climate change. But one thing that we could use about the immigration problem to help fortify people's willingness to do something is to call attention to the fact that um, if we don't want to have those kinds of problems growing in magnitude in the coming decades as climate change unfolds, one of the things that we have to do is to mitigate the extent of our destabilization of Earth's climate. It's a motive to do things that are constructive, to reduce the impact of what we've done to the climate by ceasing to do to the climate what's creating this distortion. So I haven't done anything with this. I put out a weekly op-ed piece in Conservative Country. The kind of people I'm guessing, though I haven't, it's more than a decade since I ran for Congress, and I think immigration was already something of an issue, but Trump with his Mexican rapists just inflamed it more, and the Republicans in Congress are playing games with it. But my guess is that a lot of these people would be the kinds of people who get upset when they already seem to be upset with the demographic change. That means that they're not so dominant in America, even demographically, as they used to be, because immigration has changed the composition of the country so that people like from Northern European, Anglo-Saxon, Protestant, whatever cultures are just plain old white from Europe, constitute a smaller percentage of the American population. And so there's and then, I'm in the Confederacy, and that was a culture that was essentially formed around fundamentally racist ideas that justified one race enslaving another. So I've heard that if you went to a bar around here, you would hear language that people don't use on TV of a racist sort. So all of that feeds into the reality that this might be a place where Trump can benefit politically by exacerbating and fanning the flames of bigotry and making the immigration issue more disturbing to more people. But I haven't decided whether there's anything useful I could do with this idea that if you don't want immigration, if you don't want a world that's even more in a disturbed condition than it is now over the issue of immigration, help us act responsibly now to mitigate the coming of climate change, because that's just going to generate all kinds of problems of this sort, like the happened in Europe a little over a decade ago. That's and I think we could also go into what can be done to the world that these people are fleeing, whether it's Venezuela or Mexico or someplace in between, Guatemala. That would make people motivated to stay where they were. People don't leave their homeland for no good reason. I don't think so. I'm a somewhat adventuresome person, but it would take a lot to get me to leave behind a country where people speak the language I speak, and where things are familiar, and where maybe I've got some kind of a position where I can endure, or turning my life upside down for no good reason. I don't expect very many people are. Oh, there may be some brave souls that, that do that, but they don't usually come over here, like an American expat ready to set up a little personal empire, like people might have in Costa Rica right now. Though even that would be uh, a big adventure. But when people come to the Texas Mexico border, the way they are, they've put themselves in a position that I don't think very many people would put themselves in, except for a really good reason. And so maybe one can use the issue of immigration, even if we have to play more less generously than we might ideally want to take our actual compassion and self-interest and use that to motivate us to figure out, and the American policy has done this in some ways sometimes, to invest in the countries from which people are fleeing, the kinds of programs, energies, resources, and whatever that might lead those countries to develop into something that people won't feel a need to. I would be very interested to be told by somebody who knew about these things how possible that is. Is it possible for us as a nation to deal with the immigration issue by healing some of the broken aspects of the world that people are fleeing while keeping them in that world so our society doesn't get thrown into turmoil? Well, those are some of my thoughts about the difficult immigration issue. There are beautiful sentiments to be had about loving our neighbor as ourselves and doing for them what we would hope that somebody would do for us under similar circumstances, while at the same time having to make decisions that are about how to take the world from the way it actually is and make progress in the direction we have to get to of being a more whole world where people can thrive and not be miserable, and especially where human civilization can survive for the long haul and not to destroy itself. And letting fascism take control of a country like the United States is really not a good idea if you want to help humanity not destroy itself in the generations to come. Thanks. Bye-bye.